me on my wedding morning. I am Cassandra at 29 years of age, and that was supposed to be the most perfect day of my entire life. Sheer terror quickly consumed me when I instinctively reached up to adjust my hair but felt nothing besides raw and blistered skin. I stared in absolute shock as thick locks of my long hair lay scattered all over the pristine white silk pillowcase. My sister stepped in with a sickeningly triumphant smirk plastered across her face while staring at my head. She looked down at my ruined scalp and cheerfully delivered a cruel blow in her typically shrill voice. "No one wants a bald bride, so this wedding will definitely be cancelled," rather than screaming or breaking down in tears exactly as she desperately wanted. I simply gave her a cold smile. I calmly put on my incredibly expensive designer gown and decided to walk down that aisle with a completely bare head without attempting to hide anything. When I finally stepped into the venue, not a single guest dared to whisper about my bizarre appearance. Their attention was entirely captivated by a video lasting exactly 82 seconds playing on the massive projector screen. In just those short 82 seconds, I completely destroyed the fake career and relationships my toxic sister had spent years building. I am so glad you found this video, so please stick around until the very end of my story and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. This will help me see exactly how far my voice and my truth have traveled across the world. The deep wounds within our family certainly did not just appear on my wedding morning, because they had been quietly bleeding for 15 years since we were little children. Growing up in our household always felt incredibly stifling since Mom and Dad constantly placed both of us on an invisible scale. I often found myself feeling intensely guilty simply for bringing home perfect report cards, while my older sister Diana continuously struggled with her academic performance. Rather than encouraging her to study harder or finding a tutor, my parents inadvertently nurtured a toxic environment by making me dim my own light so she would not feel inferior. They would often hide my academic awards in the bottom drawer of a cabinet, just to ensure she never had to look at my successes. That poisonous jealousy truly began manifesting through hidden acts of sabotage during our middle school years when my talents became too obvious to hide. I spent 3 entire weeks painstakingly building a wooden scale model for an important architectural competition, only to wake up and find it completely smashed to pieces on the garage floor. Diana stood nearby with a perfectly feigned look of innocence while claiming the family dog had somehow knocked it off the tall workbench. The dog was far too small to reach that height, but nobody wanted to address the glaring logical flaw in her ridiculous story. Instead of holding her accountable for the obvious destruction, Mom and Dad pressured me to swallow my tears and forgive her immediately, just to maintain a fragile family peace. Mom would gently stroke my shoulder and whisper that I needed to be the bigger person because Diana was going through a difficult emotional phase. As we transitioned into adulthood, our paths diverged completely based on our drastically different work ethics and core values. I spent countless sleepless nights studying complex design software and eventually secured a demanding position as a landscape architect, where I built a solid career through genuine effort. Diana chose a much darker path filled with deceit to establish herself as a prominent social media influencer. She constructed an entirely fabricated lifestyle online to attract lucrative brand sponsorships while secretly tearing down anyone who stood in her way. She was perfectly willing to trample over other people's hard work to elevate her own status in the highly competitive digital world. I witnessed her blatantly steal creative marketing concepts from her weaker colleagues and present those brilliant ideas as her own original thoughts during major client pitches. She manipulated her millions of followers with a sweet persona, but operated with ruthless cruelty behind closed doors to secure highly paid advertising contracts. During family dinners, she would aggressively boast about her luxurious free trips and designer clothes, while completely dismissing my legitimate career as boring office work. Her entire existence revolved around projecting an illusion of wealth and superiority to mask her deep insecurities regarding her lack of actual talent. The fragile truce we maintained finally shattered into a million pieces the moment I reached two major milestones in my personal life. I used my own hard-earned savings to purchase an expensive house in a highly desirable neighborhood without asking anyone for financial assistance. Shortly after that milestone, my fiancé Derek proposed to me with a beautiful ring and the promise of a genuinely loving partnership. He is a brilliant software engineer who treats me with absolute respect, and his unwavering devotion became the final spark that ignited her explosive resentment. Seeing me achieve genuine happiness without needing to fake anything drove her absolutely insane with envy because she realized no amount of internet fame could buy real love. Recognizing the dangerous negative energy radiating from her, whenever we were in the same room, I proactively established very strict boundaries. I intentionally maintained a safe physical and emotional distance from her for many months leading up to the wedding ceremony. I severely limited our interactions and strictly avoided sharing any important details regarding my wedding planning or guest list to protect my own mental health. Whenever she tried to pry into my wedding arrangements during rare phone calls, I would politely change the subject to avoid giving her any ammunition. I truly believed that keeping her at arm's length would be enough to prevent any potential disasters on my special day, but I severely underestimated her malice. 10 days before the wedding ceremony, the peaceful atmosphere inside my apartment was abruptly shattered by a completely unannounced visit. Diana suddenly appeared at my front door holding a massive basket of incredibly expensive flowers, with a sickly sweet smile plastered across her face. She practically forced her way inside and aggressively insisted on taking absolute responsibility for all my bridal beauty preparations leading up to the big day. This sudden display of excessive care immediately triggered every single defense mechanism inside my brain because my sharp intuition screamed that something was terribly wrong. A person who had harbored intense hatred and jealousy toward me for several decades could not possibly experience a genuine change of heart overnight. I carried this heavy burden of anxiety straight to Derek the moment we had some privacy in the living room that evening. I explained my deep suspicions regarding her sudden arrival and detailed exactly why her overly affectionate behavior felt so incredibly dangerous to me. Derek looked directly into my eyes with unwavering support and firmly said, "I completely trust your intuition because we absolutely cannot turn a blind eye to this massive risk." Having his solid validation gave me the immense courage I needed to proactively protect myself from whatever malicious scheme she was currently plotting. The very next morning, I took matters into my own hands by discreetly purchasing a highly sophisticated micro-surveillance camera system online. I waited until she left the apartment for a brief shopping trip before carefully installing these tiny devices in strategic locations around my home. I perfectly disguised the microscopic lenses within the darkest corners of my private bathroom and directly above my personal vanity makeup area. These hidden cameras were meticulously positioned to capture every possible angle without raising any suspicion, even if someone was specifically looking for them. I synchronized the live video feeds directly to a heavily encrypted application on my personal smartphone to ensure absolute privacy and security. Throughout the remaining days of her uninvited stay inside my apartment, Diana played the role of a supportive sibling with terrifying perfection. She would constantly hover around my workspace while offering unsolicited advice regarding my skincare routine and physical appearance for the upcoming ceremony. One evening, she walked into the kitchen to hand me a steaming cup of expensive herbal tea while gently patting my shoulder. She looked at me with those calculating eyes and softly whispered, "I just want you to be the most gorgeous bride in the entire world." That seemingly affectionate statement sent a literal chill down my spine because the completely hollow tone of her voice betrayed her true intentions. I completely ignored those deceitful, honeyed words while maintaining the most polite and calm social demeanor I could possibly muster under the stressful circumstances. I treated her exactly like a distant acquaintance visiting for the holidays by offering polite smiles while keeping my emotional walls built incredibly high. Every single night after she had finally retreated to the guest bedroom, I would lie awake in the dark watching her through my glowing phone screen. I silently monitored her every single movement through those hidden cameras while meticulously documenting any suspicious behavior that might reveal her ultimate sabotage plan. She spent hours rummaging through my expensive beauty products whenever she thought I was fast asleep or thoroughly distracted by my tedious wedding planning tasks. I watched her carefully examine the expensive bottles of specialized shampoo and conditioner I had specifically purchased for my highly anticipated wedding day. Derek would often sit beside me in the dim lighting of our bedroom as we reviewed the recorded footage together in absolute silence. He squeezed my hand reassuringly whenever my anxiety threatened to overwhelm me during those incredibly tense nights of constant digital surveillance. Despite her highly suspicious snooping around my private belongings, she had not yet made any definitive moves that could be considered actual, undeniable sabotage. I knew deep down in my gut that she was simply waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike when my guard was fully lowered. My relentless vigilance became a highly exhausting nightly routine, but I was absolutely determined to catch her red-handed before she could ruin my future. 1 week before walking down the aisle, I decided to personally dig deep into the seemingly perfect facade Diana constantly flaunted all over social media. She had carelessly left her primary laptop completely unlocked on the kitchen counter while taking a long phone call in the garden. Utilizing some very basic computer troubleshooting skills, I casually navigated through her unencrypted local storage folders without triggering any digital alarms. My blood ran completely cold when I stumbled upon a massive media project file she had recently submitted to her management agency. A quick cross-reference of the metadata chillingly revealed that she had entirely stolen the comprehensive marketing campaign from a struggling former colleague. The digital rabbit hole grew exponentially darker as I continued exploring a hidden directory containing numerous unfiltered voice memos and recorded phone conversations. I successfully extracted a series of incredibly disturbing audio files where she viciously mocked the exact same brand partners who actively funded her lavish lifestyle. She used the most vulgar and ungrateful language imaginable to violently tear down her so-called elite circle of extremely wealthy influencer friends. Listening to her gleefully insult the physical appearances and personal struggles of her closest VIP companions made me feel physically nauseous. She was actively building her lucrative empire on a fragile foundation of absolute deceit, while pretending to be an advocate for female empowerment. I immediately locked myself inside my private home office and began the tedious process of compiling this mountain of toxic evidence into a singular timeline. I painstakingly edited the stolen document screenshots and those vile audio recordings together to create a rough but devastatingly effective documentary video. My initial intention was never to actually publish this digital weapon, but rather to keep it as a desperate defensive shield in case she crossed the ultimate line. I carefully arranged the timeline to ensure every single stolen concept directly lined up with her corresponding voice note bragging about the theft. This newly created digital file was a terrifying manifestation of her true character, stripped of all the expensive filters and carefully curated studio lighting. Derek sat closely beside me, staring at the glowing monitor as he meticulously double-checked the heavy encryption layers securing the newly compiled video file. He frowned with deep concern while processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal we had just uncovered within those stolen audio clips. Looking directly at the screen, he sternly warned me, "These specific files possess enough explosive power to completely destroy her entire career. So you absolutely must keep this drive hidden in a secure location without any internet connection." "Say, I completely agreed with his cautious assessment and immediately transferred the solitary video file onto an external encrypted flash drive before wiping all the residual data from my local computer network. Later that same evening, the entire family gathered in the living room, where Diana appeared incredibly proud while arrogantly boasting to Mom and Dad about her latest social achievements. She loudly clapped her hands together and enthusiastically announced, "I successfully invited my primary brand director and my entire VIP circle of close girlfriends to the reception, so this wedding is going to be incredibly classy." She spent the next hour parading around the room, detailing exactly how her wealthy friends would elevate the overall aesthetic of my relatively modest countryside venue. Mom and Dad beamed with absolute pride at her apparent generosity, completely unaware of the venomous insults she had secretly recorded about those exact same guests. This arrogant display of aggressive social climbing unintentionally created the most perfect theatrical stage anyone could have ever possibly orchestrated for a grand finale. By actively insisting on bringing her powerful corporate sponsors and elite socialite friends to my deeply personal family event, she was gathering the ultimate jury. She was deliberately planting the most important witnesses right in the front rows to witness her own spectacular downfall if my ticking time bomb actually needed to detonate. Every single person she had brutally mocked in those hidden voice memos would be sitting together drinking champagne and watching the projector screen. Her insatiable hunger for superficial validation was quietly building the exact scaffolding required for her inevitable public execution. The night right before the dawn of my highly anticipated wedding ceremony, every single guest was already fast asleep following our lavish rehearsal dinner. The sprawling estate of the exclusive Greenwich Country Club was completely enveloped in absolute silence while I stood outside on my master's suite balcony. I was deeply breathing in the crisp, midnight air to calm my lingering anxieties when a sudden visual anomaly caught my peripheral vision. A very faint sliver of artificial yellow light was visibly spilling out from beneath the heavy wooden door of my strictly private attached bathroom. Absolutely nobody else was supposed to be wandering inside my personal sanctuary during these incredibly vulnerable late-night hours, especially considering everyone had their own designated suites. I knew instantly that something was terribly wrong because the entire bridal wing was supposed to be completely restricted from all other attendees. My heart instantly began pounding furiously against my ribcage as I quietly pushed the solid wooden door open without making a single sound. I immediately caught Diana standing absolutely frozen right next to my expensive customized cosmetics shelf with an expression of pure, unadulterated panic completely taking over her pale face. She was desperately attempting to hide an unidentified foreign object behind her back, while simultaneously trying to maintain her physical balance on the slippery marble floor. Attempting to keep my voice remarkably steady so I would not prematurely alert her to my underlying suspicions, I firmly confronted her bold intrusion. Looking directly into her terrified eyes, I strictly demanded, "What the hell are you doing in my private bathroom at 2 a.m?" The heavy silence hanging between us felt incredibly suffocating as she visibly scrambled to formulate a believable response to my extremely direct interrogation. Diana stammered incomprehensibly for several long seconds, while her shifty eyes nervously darted around the brightly lit vanity area looking for an easy escape route. She awkwardly shifted her weight from one foot to another before aggressively squeezing her body past my shoulder to reach the open doorway. Refusing to make any direct eye contact with me, she casually dropped a remarkably clumsy excuse into the extremely tense atmosphere. She softly muttered, "I was just looking for some makeup remover pads, so I am genuinely sorry for startling you like this." Her hasty retreat down the carpeted hallway left behind a deeply unsettling aura that instantly magnified the relentless warning bells loudly ringing inside my head. I watched her practically run back to her own assigned room while fiercely gripping whatever she had successfully concealed behind her back. The very second she completely disappeared from my line of sight, I immediately began conducting a meticulously thorough inspection of the entire bathroom space. I carefully examined the pristine white ceramic bathtub and rigorously checked every single freshly folded cotton towel for any potential signs of deliberate tampering. I spent a considerable amount of time opening various expensive cosmetic jars and closely inspecting the intricate glass bottles lining the brightly illuminated mirrored medicine cabinet. Despite conducting such an exhaustive physical search, my naked eyes absolutely could not detect any strange residue or unusual chemical odors lingering in the humid air. The entire room appeared completely untouched and perfectly normal, which ironically made my paranoid subconscious mind feel significantly more terrified about the unknown variables surrounding her bizarre midnight visit. Even though my sharp intuition was continuously screaming a frantic warning about a hidden imminent danger, I eventually managed to temporarily rationalize the bizarre late-night encounter. I desperately convinced myself that I had simply startled an envious woman looking to secretly borrow some high-end skincare products without actually asking for my permission beforehand. Pushing those lingering doubts deep down into the darkest recesses of my exhausted mind, I boldly stepped directly into the warm running water of the spacious glass shower. I generously lathered my long flowing hair using my favorite specialized bridal shampoo, completely unaware of the devastating trap waiting patiently inside that specific plastic bottle. I had absolutely no way of consciously knowing that a highly corrosive, colorless, and completely odorless chemical compound had already been perfectly dissolved within that luxurious soapy liquid. The soothing hot water washed over my tired body while an irreversible chemical reaction quietly began destroying the delicate roots of my healthy hair. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, on the day of my highly anticipated wedding ceremony, I was abruptly awakened by a truly horrifying sensation. A searing heat that felt exactly like a raging fire was aggressively running across every single inch of my burning scalp. Confronting the devastatingly cruel reality of my situation, I frantically reached up only to discover that my long, beautiful hair had completely fallen out without leaving a single strand behind. I immediately grabbed my encrypted smartphone with trembling hands to extract the digital video footage from the microscopic surveillance cameras hidden inside my private bathroom. Watching the crisp, high-definition screen, I explicitly witnessed the exact horrifying moment when Diana maliciously poured an entire bottle of corrosive chemical compound directly into my bridal shampoo just seconds before I had knocked on her door last night. I seamlessly added this final piece of undeniable criminal evidence to the very end of my previously compiled video file to complete my 82-second masterpiece of absolute destruction. Only a few tense minutes later, the heavy wooden door swung open, and Diana casually strolled into the brightly lit bridal makeup room with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She absolutely refused to even pretend to be concerned about my devastating physical condition and completely dropped her sickeningly sweet, supportive sibling act. Staring directly at my ruined scalp, she burst into cruel laughter and cheerfully delivered a deeply malicious blow to my already fragile emotional state. She looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror and mockingly sneered, "No one wants a bald bride, so this wedding will definitely be canceled." Rather than screaming in agonizing emotional pain or physically attacking her like a completely deranged lunatic, I simply remained perfectly still on my velvet makeup chair. I slowly turned my head toward her and offered an incredibly cold and calculated smirk that instantly caused her arrogant smile to freeze in total confusion. She was clearly expecting a massive hysterical breakdown, but my eerie silence deeply unsettled her malicious spirit. The suffocating tension inside the room was suddenly broken when my best friend Fiona forcefully pushed the door open holding several garment bags. She dropped the heavy plastic bags onto the floor and immediately burst into uncontrollable tears, the absolute second she witnessed the horrifying tragedy on my head. She frantically rushed across the room to wrap her trembling arms tightly around my shoulders while attempting to process the completely bizarre visual reality of my missing hair. Sobbing heavily into my silk getting ready robe, she desperately cried out, "Oh my God, what the hell happened to you? Because we need to call the police right now." I gently patted her shaking hands and calmly reassured her that everything was already being handled according to a very specific master plan that she would soon witness for herself. I strictly instructed her to dry her tears and prepare the audiovisual equipment because the upcoming ceremony was going to proceed exactly on schedule regardless of my physical appearance. Derek burst into the crowded bridal suite like a massive tornado after receiving an urgent text message regarding the escalating situation inside my room. He aggressively pushed past Diana without giving her a single glance, and immediately dropped to his knees right beside my vanity chair to carefully inspect my damaged scalp. He aggressively wiped away the few devastating tears that were actively threatening to spill from the corners of his deeply concerned eyes before gently holding my face. He leaned forward to press a remarkably tender and fiercely determined kiss directly onto the top of my completely bald head to physically demonstrate his unwavering support. He looked deeply into my eyes and firmly affirmed that he was going to marry me at all costs, regardless of whatever vicious gossip might circulate among the wealthy attendees outside. His incredible display of unconditional love provided the exact surge of adrenaline I desperately needed to execute the final phase of my carefully orchestrated retaliation. Despite the frantic objections and endless worried suggestions from my dedicated bridal party, I firmly refused to utilize any expensive lace wigs or decorative silk ribbons to conceal my heavily damaged scalp. I absolutely rejected the notion of hiding in shame, because doing so would simply give my malicious attacker the exact psychological victory she so desperately craved. I stood up tall and confidently allowed Fiona to help me step into my incredibly expensive custom-designed designer wedding gown that I had waited months to wear. Feeling the heavy silk and delicate lace wrap around my body, I held my bare head incredibly high with an unprecedented level of intense personal pride. I took one final look at my striking reflection in the full-length mirror before preparing to confidently stride out of that stuffy waiting room to face my ultimate destiny. The orchestral music was already beginning to play through the distant speakers, signaling that it was finally time to walk straight into the breathtaking outdoor ceremony area. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, inside the grand main hall of the luxurious country club, the beautiful symphony music was abruptly drowned out by a massive wave of extreme astonishment. Hundreds of elite high society eyes simultaneously darted toward the heavy wooden entrance doors to witness my highly anticipated bridal arrival. Countless wealthy guests simply could not conceal their loud gasps of pure shock when they saw me confidently striding down the thick rose-covered aisle. I held my posture incredibly straight while proudly displaying my completely bald head without a single strand of hair remaining to hide my damaged scalp. The heavy silence that suddenly fell over the previously cheerful crowd was thick enough to be cut with a solid silver knife, as absolutely everyone struggled to mentally process the deeply disturbing visual reality. The exact moment I gracefully stepped onto the elevated wooden altar, Derek immediately reached out to tightly squeeze my freezing cold hands to actively transfer his immense warmth and unwavering courage. He flashed me an incredibly proud and loving smile before raising his right hand to discreetly signal the bewildered ordained pastor to immediately halt the traditional wedding vows. Following our meticulously arranged secret counterattack plan, the massive digital LED screen positioned directly behind the main speaking podium suddenly flashed with a blindingly bright white light. Our completely unedited 82-second documentary began broadcasting directly to the entire formal reception hall without requiring any fancy verbal introductions or dramatic preemptive warnings. The absolute truth was finally about to be violently unleashed upon the very people who had actively funded the incredibly glamorous yet entirely fraudulent lifestyle of my deeply jealous sibling. Every single piece of incredibly dirty evidence we had painstakingly gathered brutally assaulted the retinas of the hundreds of important VIP guests sitting in the reserved front rows. The high-definition footage clearly displayed the stolen marketing project documents, while the crystal-clear audio recordings exposed her viciously cursing out her wealthy brand partners using the most vulgar terminology imaginable. The grand finale of the digital presentation featured the undeniable infrared security footage, explicitly capturing her maliciously pouring the highly corrosive chemical compound directly into my personal bridal shampoo bottle at midnight. The collective gasp that erupted from the deeply shocked audience practically shook the expensive crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling as the undeniable reality of her extreme cruelty became public knowledge. Nobody in that massive reception room could possibly deny the overwhelming visual and audio proof of her incredibly malicious sabotage. The deafening silence following the incredibly explosive video presentation was aggressively shattered when Diana's executive director, Mr. Sterling, furiously jumped up from his reserved front row seat. His face was completely red with extreme professional indignation as he aggressively pointed his index finger directly at her trembling figure standing near the beautiful floral archway. He roared with absolute fury, echoing loudly throughout the enormous sacred sanctuary. "You are a despicable fraud, so you are officially fired and prepare to receive a formal subpoena from our corporate lawyers first thing tomorrow morning." His booming voice carried the crushing weight of absolute professional destruction and completely sealed her inevitable fate within the highly competitive digital marketing industry forever. The surrounding elite influencers who had previously worshipped her immediately began loudly expressing their own intense disgust while furiously demanding immediate public apologies. Witnessing her entire meticulously crafted empire crumble into absolute dust within mere seconds caused her to completely collapse onto the polished hardwood floor in a state of absolute panicked hysteria. She desperately flailed her arms around while aggressively screaming at the disgusted crowd. "This is all a massive misunderstanding because somebody maliciously edited those audio clips to completely frame me for something I never did." Completely ignoring her pathetic theatrical performance, I coldly locked eyes with the towering head of club security, who had quickly rushed toward the main altar to rapidly assess the escalating chaotic situation. Projecting my voice clearly over her relentless hysterical sobbing, I firmly commanded the approaching armed guards, "Escort this dangerous saboteur off the private estate premises immediately so we can finally resume our beautiful wedding celebration in absolute peace." The burly security team swiftly grabbed her by both arms and forcefully dragged her kicking and screaming body completely out of the grand reception hall. 6 months after that devastatingly explosive earthquake at the Greenwich Country Club, my daily life smoothly transitioned into a completely radiant and incredibly peaceful new cycle without any lingering shadows. The entirely fabricated virtual empire that Diana had painstakingly built over several decades completely collapsed into irreparable ruins within just a few short weeks of the highly publicized incident. She was immediately terminated by her prestigious management agency and rapidly forced to face a massive avalanche of million-dollar breach of contract lawsuits from her former corporate sponsors. Her once highly coveted social media presence was thoroughly eradicated as millions of outraged followers actively participated in completely boycotting her across every single digital networking platform available today. She was publicly forced to sell her expensive luxury vehicles and designer wardrobe collections just to barely afford the mounting legal fees associated with her incredibly messy corporate lawsuits. The incredibly harsh reality of her public execution severely impacted her personal relationships as her incredibly superficial boyfriend immediately packed his expensive designer luggage without offering any genuine sympathy. He coldly delivered a highly calculated breakup speech right inside their shared luxury apartment to quickly distance his own lucrative digital brand from her massively radioactive public relations scandal. Mom and Dad were utterly devastated by the overwhelming public humiliation their favorite golden child had aggressively brought upon our previously respected family name within our tight-knit community. They were ultimately forced to completely cut off all financial support for Diana to protect their own retirement savings, while continuously sending me countless tear-stained letters, desperately begging for forgiveness. They desperately wanted to pretend the horrifying wedding incident was merely a terrible misunderstanding so we could magically return to playing the role of a perfectly happy suburban family. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a desperate voicemail message from my weeping mother that perfectly encapsulated their ongoing delusional perspective regarding our deeply shattered family dynamic. Through heavy sobs, she desperately pleaded over the distorted audio recording, "Please just give your sister one more chance because she has lost absolutely everything and our family is completely broken." Sitting beside me on our comfortable living room sofa, Derek gently squeezed my hand and firmly validated my unwavering stance by softly stating, "You made the absolute right decision to protect our future from their endless toxic drama." I looked directly into his loving eyes and firmly replied, "She deliberately tried to destroy my life, so this family was broken a very long time ago, and I am finally choosing my own peace." I immediately deleted the pathetic voicemail message without shedding a single tear, and proceeded to confidently execute my permanent strategy of absolute emotional detachment. I firmly established an unbreakable steel boundary connecting me to those incredibly toxic people who shared my biological bloodline. I categorically refused to entertain any pathetic attempts at family reconciliation because preserving the incredibly peaceful sanctuary of my newly established marriage remained my absolute highest personal priority. Moving forward without the constant suffocating weight of my childhood trauma felt exactly like taking my very first breath of fresh oxygen after silently drowning for nearly 30 consecutive years. I completely ignored the occasional pitying whispers from distant relatives who attempted to guilt-trip me because their irrelevant external opinions held absolutely zero power over my newly discovered sense of supreme self-worth. The profound silence inside my beautiful new home served as a daily reminder that removing highly toxic individuals from your personal environment creates the necessary space for genuine happiness to truly flourish. As 6 incredibly healing months peacefully passed by, my aggressively damaged hair slowly began growing back in thick, healthy clusters that filled me with immense personal joy and deep gratitude. I no longer feel the heavy burden of constantly having to prove my worth to parents who are fully committed to misunderstanding my intentions just to protect their deeply flawed favorite daughter. I thoroughly enjoy spending my quiet weekend mornings sipping freshly brewed aromatic coffee on the porch with Derek, while feeling perfectly content with my beautifully authentic current reality. The terrifying nightmare that originally threatened to completely consume my special wedding day miraculously transformed into the greatest catalyst for achieving my ultimate personal liberation. Smiling brightly at the rising morning sun, I feel an overwhelming sense of profound satisfaction, knowing I successfully eradicated the most malignant toxic tumor from my entire earthly existence. Before we wrap up today's incredibly dramatic story, please do not scroll away just yet, because Cassandra courageously navigate this intense family betrayal provides us with some exceptionally valuable educational lessons regarding toxic relationships. I firmly believe that sharing a biological bloodline with someone never gives them a free pass to continuously disrespect or actively sabotage your happiness. Many society norms constantly preach the concept of unconditional family forgiveness, but Cassandra brilliantly demonstrated that setting a permanent boundary is often the only realistic method to protect your own mental health. Her unwavering decision to execute a strict no-contact rule proves that choosing your own peace over a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic is a profound act of supreme self-love. Furthermore, her deeply supportive relationship with Derek highlights how having a genuinely devoted partner during your most vulnerable moments is the ultimate victory over those who wish to see you fail. Now, I want to turn the conversation over to our amazing community because your unique perspectives always add so much immense value to these educational discussions. If you were standing in Cassandra's shoes, would you have permanently cut off your parents for constantly enabling that toxic sibling behavior, or would you eventually attempt to reconcile with them? Have you ever had to establish an unbreakable boundary with a highly manipulative family member in your own personal life? Please share your honest thoughts and personal experiences down in the comments section below, because I genuinely love reading every single one of your insightful opinions. Thank you so much for listening to this entire journey, and I absolutely cannot wait